make some improvements, we would begin to look at the Northeast as a potential priority because of these indicators that we've just come up with. Okay?
The West is pretty standard, they're pretty similar.
Mm-hmm. And so what one way to do it is not necessarily to add more things, more equipment or more things in components into the site, but to look at this idea of can you make some amenity improvements. It may be that just doing some simple things. It may be some more seating, or it may be some shade, maybe some additional drinking fountains or other amenities that would bump those scores up and turn purple to yellow. So it begins to become a case where we begin to look at these areas and say what's missing in those areas, or what are the opportunities, or do we need to add things? And it's only in the areas of gray, where the shading is gray, that we would need to even think of, have to have another site or location. We can do a lot within the parks and sites that you already have because they're well distributed across the community. So now we're going to look at playgrounds as an example of how we can begin to take this apart piece by piece, because we can sort, what we've been looking at dumps all of the amenities into one thing, but we could begin to look at play, we could begin to look at picnicking, we could begin to look at soccer, we could begin to look at any variety of things by just filtering out those components that serve that and plotting these geographies in these service areas and seeing what we have. We did it with playgrounds here. And what this map is showing us is that these blue areas are where they actually have 2 or more standard playgrounds in the inventory that are serving them. So if you live in one of these blue areas, you actually, within that proximity, have access to 2 or more playgrounds that are in the inventory. If you are in this red circles, you have access to 1 playground that is scored low in our inventory. So it did not get a high score.
Those got ones.
Yeah, yeah.
More likely.
Yeah, they were ones. Yeah, that's what it is. 1. It's a score of 1. These are playgrounds that got scored a 1. And then these are all areas that have a third of a mile access to walkable playgrounds, meaning they're doing pretty well. These areas, are okay. Probably don't really need to focus on those right away. But from a play standpoint, we would want to say, well, we don't have anything over here. So we're short, coming up short over here. Do we need some playgrounds over here? There may be some playgrounds, again, that aren't in the inventory because there are other providers or fall outside the boundary. We need to look closer at this when we're talking about what to do about playgrounds. These are the drive-to buffers, or the 1 mile buffers. So if you look at it as an ability to get within a mile, it looks a different picture. So this is telling us quite a bit. It's telling us what the walkable attributes are, and it's showing us what a little more drive time will do, and where there's no service, and then where these areas are served by multiple playgrounds. So for example, let's look at an area like this down here, or Todd, you may tell me where the most is one of these, or we want to talk about.
Well, the one that we've been discussing a lot lately is Clearwater, and then the park they're going to dedicate Saturday, which was Mayfair, which now has a different name. And so that is a clear case of an opportunity where this particular subdivision had access to 2 playgrounds. One is in disrepair, one was just completely redone. So when you're looking at the big picture, as Robbie said, the opportunity that this neighborhood has access to 1 brand new playground would lead us to believe that maybe Clearwater Springs could be retooled, or a different type of play system could be installed so we don't duplicate services, which that is a trend. Maybe it is more of a nature playground, maybe it's some type of climbing playground versus a traditional play booster system, which was just put in over at the new park. And the ones that are in red are the ones that really are the ones that need attention quickly in terms of a capital plan, which once again gives you the ability to look at trends and understand, are there opportunities based in these different populations. Now keep in mind, when I did my demographics, there's different age demographics, different expectations. So maybe this playground down here isn't exactly the same as more of the ones that are located in the northwest section of town. So then you get down to really the sub-level of making decisions based on information that we've cataloged and did our analysis on.
Right, and so it can be based on trends in various ways. This is bringing the trends discussion into play, is if we have areas like these, let's say, you know, these playgrounds, if they get to a point where they need some refurbishment, it might be saying, well, let's take one of these and make it more of a nature play area, and the other one more of a developed play, so that we get a variety, we expand the opportunities within these areas rather than just duplicating services. Because the trend is more natural play and nature play and those kinds of things. It may be that that's what we create over here. Maybe we don't really need to, if we don't have a park, but maybe there's a place where we can incorporate some other kind of play.
But those are kind of discussions that put the cart before the horse,
Right.
because there were reasons why there were no parks there that were beyond our control.
Yeah, well, and so that's why I'm saying, it may mean, this isn't telling us what to do.
Right.
It's telling us where to look.
Right.
Yeah,
So I'm just,
yeah.
the
It's not
verbiage you're
prescriptive.
using sometimes is
Yeah.
kind of like, well, no, that's not necessarily true.
Yeah,
But we do have an opportunity to get it right in this western boundary.
yeah.
You know, that is the difference between the 70s and 80s drive culture and now the new trends of walkability. You can see this as no service. So when the park district is negotiating with developers with the village, look at these areas to transform your system into a better way than what this model represents.
Yeah,
So
that's a lot of times beyond our control, though.
well, I would think that if
We
we're
don't
part of
write the contribution ordinances, the village does. We're subject to them, but we don't necessarily have a hand in developing those things.
Well, I think one of our recommendations would be to open the discussion up and really try to plan for the future, and understand that you do have significant growth that is going to happen,
Agreed.
and try to make it a different system.
I'm not
And still
disagreeing with you
respect.
at all. I'm
Yeah.
just saying that, there's.
But now we have some evidence to show
Yeah, I was just
versus
gonna say, that's-
than our opinions,
Right.
because opinions can be up or down, but when we have real data to show the powers that be to listen to the conversation, it may not be what we get, but at least we're coming to the table with some good ammunition to have those discussions.
Yeah, you now have tools that say, and you can go back to the earlier ones and say, we have identified the level of service, for example, in these darker shaded areas. Our goal would be to hopefully, and then hopefully the developers and the other entities that have a say would share that vision once they see it lined out, that, hey, let's make these areas at least as good as what we have over here. That would be our, at least our vision, and how can we go about doing that?
Got a question for you. How's that way out? Okay, you got outdoor facilities versus that park district doesn't have an indoor athletic facility. You know, how's that way out between all these parks and so on, and what the people are demanding for?
Well, sometimes an
It's
indoor.
been, like I said, I've been hearing it, it's been on the boards or discussions for over 50 years for the park district without having an indoor facility even established. So I'm just wondering how that, your formula here is working out with the indoor facility.
Well, an indoor facility can be looked at, it depends on what your community is willing to assign a value to. I've worked in some very dense urban areas around the Washington DC area where, yeah, they really can't go in and put a park. It's just, it's totally built out. It's costs $1 million an acre just to get, the land. So,
Well, we got land.
yeah, but I'm just saying, so in that case, they have said, well, maybe we need to provide indoor facilities as at least an alternative.
Well, especially around these elements, I said, once it gets cold and snowy, so it's outdoor rec is pretty much shut down, except for the diehards, ice skaters, skiers, and so forth.
I think we do have a slide that talks about indoor facilities. I remember us having a conversation about that, and I think we might have one that kind of just demonstrates what you have and the gaps in understanding that. I know, at least if we don't have it, we're going to get it, because we have that conversation. But the one thing I wanted to point out that Robbie did mention in terms of CIP and sort of some of our work will be the redundancy factor of having, these blue circles, for example, where you have access to 2 or more playgrounds. This is something that we can make some good decisions on, whether we want to diversify our facilities on trends, or we want to look at a fiscal responsibility in terms of, do we need to duplicate these services at all? And that's a whole nother conversation. Do we take out the playground at Clearwater Springs and just restore it to open space and put some other type of amenity in place, which might be a newer trender element?
Right.
And it also saves you the cost of over $100,000 to replace the playground when you have clearly demonstrated you have a redundancy in a service level.
Right.
So that's where this adds real capital value to your planning as well.
And another way that plays into trends, to use another example from the DC area, is in Arlington County, where they had areas that, around the metro stops that have become hugely densified, but the number of children in those neighborhoods has dropped dramatically. And they had playgrounds that needed to be replaced. And so there, this could be used by combining the demographics data with where the playgrounds are to say, in this area, maybe you don't need to replace that playground, but because parkland is so hard to come by, especially in those dense areas of Arlington County, what other amenity do you need instead? That land could be better purposed. And the public was saying, we don't want a new playground here. There's no kids in the neighborhood, but we want a dog park. Can we just convert that to a dog park? So that opens up that discussion of, okay, what do we repurpose some of these areas for if we have this redundancy, or if we find that in the case of hypothetically, this playground is a one, it needs to be replaced, but we find out that there are no children living there. I had another community like that. They said, well, we had a playground, but we don't want it. They happen to be an equestrian community. We want actually a horse park where we can jump our horses. And that's what they ended up getting instead of replacing the playground.
Is it possible, or maybe you've already done this and you're not to that point yet, to do an overlay of this slide with the forest preserve and other properties that serve within our boundaries?
It's possible if we have the data, the GIS.
I guess that's the question I have, like Todd, and just looking at it, that circle gap up there,
Up here,
that we have
yeah.
right there, that actually isn't our park district boundary, but because of how an HOA park is built in there and the village of Romeoville, they've already done 2 service entities in there, so while it's in our service district, it's already being provided through another.
Right, so in terms of your district, there's a gap in service, but in the reality wise, there is an opportunity for your residents to utilize something in that capacity.
Right.
So-
And that's what I meant when I said this is telling us where to look. If we look closer, we may be able to say, yeah, there are these other facilities, other providers, there are reasons why this gap is showing up, but it's actually being covered by these other facilities.
That would be neat if you could at least, maybe just with this slide or a couple of them that you presented.
Yeah.
If we have the data, we can do about anything.
Yeah, if we have the underlying data for these other facilities outside the boundary, we can at least show them, but at the minimum, we would have that discussion in the recommendations.
Right.
And say, why is there not a recommendation to build a park here? Well, because they don't really need it. Here's why.
They're going to be serviced by.
And taking a little step further in terms of looking at the survey data, because we code it in GIS, we can actually take our survey information and single out the amenity profile of playgrounds, for example, and scatter plot on top of these circles. Is it universal that this area down here feels very strongly that playgrounds are a key component to their quality of life? And we have some red dots, that may be what we'll focus on. The Northwest area has our most income. They may not seek to look for playgrounds. There might not be a stronger will up here, even though we have a couple of red dots. So we can actually take our survey information, overlay it on some of the level of service, and actually give you sort of a quasi picture of what's there today, and then maybe what the community expects in the future.
Also, like I said, I'm not seeing any lakes or quarries and so forth, or, that's in our territories and so forth that blocks out residents in, population. So you gotta look at the density where the populations are at versus, where the parks are at now, existing. So, you're looking in the territory, it could be, like I said, I'm not sure what are you looking at right there? Is it a quarry, or is it Rimwood Lake, or, what do we got circled there? Is it populated? Yeah, you see what I'm talking about, in regards to showing something there, but,
But he's identified that's not a concern as far as level of service, it's the gray areas, so
Okay.
we can look at natural features
Yeah.
as well.
we gotta look at the lay of the land.
Exactly. So you can do this with other, besides playgrounds, if it was something else. We work with a lot of communities who are looking at ball fields, soccer fields, those kinds of amenities. Another community wanted to look at access to picnic facilities. So we can break, you can use this data to break that down, and as trends come along, if the next trend is something different with picnic facilities, then this kind of analysis can be used, because now you have the data. We just wanted to show here, basically, this is a simple in and out, 3 mile proximity to these are the indoor facilities.
Is there community parks?
I'm sorry, is it community park? Yeah. This is just saying, okay, that 1 mile that we used is again, it's more of a somewhat local level. If we went out and said a more typical standard for just what are called community parks would be this 3 mile buffer, you're well covered for that type of park. And that doesn't even account for ones that might be outside your boundary that are within 3 mile distance. This is the indoor, yeah, okay. So we do similar things with your indoor, just locations. And so this shows again that you have these indoor locations that are spread across the community in such a way that most of the community is inside this 3 mile access range of those locations. Now that doesn't get a qualitative piece of what is at those locations, is that meeting the needs for indoor facilities, and that's a separate question. This analysis isn't really intended to answer that. This is a more quantitative analysis of where those are located and in relation to the boundaries of your community.
But we could, in theory, take some of our survey data and see if these facilities are meeting those needs and seeing if there is a historical, because I think, to your point, yes, we have good locations of these facilities, but we all know these facilities don't meet the expectations of the community. So that's kind of what your point is that yes, we physically have the dot, which serves the radius, but in reality-wise, we know that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of the indoor facilities.
And that's why this map is different than the shaded ones. The shaded ones do take in those variations in what's there and the quality of those things. The shaded ones are shaded because they recognize that each park is different. This kind of analysis, which is the more traditional analysis, this is what you would get. In the traditional analysis, you would get the previous slide with community parks. That's what you would get, and you might get another one with smaller circles for walkability, and they're all the same shade. We went to the shaded composite mapping because it does recognize that each place is a little different.
So is it possible, as we talk about the demographics and the building up of the southwest corridor, that if possibly we were talking about a large indoor facility, that maybe we should look at developing there rather than in the center where right now we have such a focus of.
I think that's a really great discussion, and I think you need to have the discussion because there's pros and cons.
Yeah.
The central location is
Just for
central.
everybody, yeah.
Yeah, and you might want to look at if you have other modes of access, if you have a transit system or something like that, can people get to one location versus another? But your thinking is absolutely right. If you're going to add new facilities, consider adding them in these areas that are lacking in service or are going to have a higher need for service in the future, thinking down the road, okay, we're going to have a lot of people living out there, and this will provide some of the service for them as they come on board. So it's a good discussion to weigh the pros and cons of both of those.
And those decisions will affect what these maps look like in,
Right.
15, 20 years down the road.
Right. So we talked briefly a while ago about trails. This shows you what we have for trails data. There may be other trails out there, but this is just what we have mapping available for. And what it shows is showing both existing trails and ones that are identified as proposed. And then we've marked these shaded areas. The solid pink is within a third of a mile of existing segments of trail. And then the shaded areas are showing what the future looks like if these get built out, where places will be in proximity. So what would happen is if this system is built out, it's going to increase the level of service. The shades would get darker in these areas on the other maps. It's already dark in this area, it'll get even darker. So that's what these would do though, if the trails are built out. That's what I meant when I said, the trails can serve as kind of like a neighborhood park need in some ways. And they add to that level of service. So really down the spine of the community, you will see increased level of service as the trail gets built out.
Which is a really wonderful investment in terms of an amenity, but also increasing your ability to access
Yeah,
the parks and facilities that you have. It's a pretty defined spine, which is kind of unique. Most communities don't have such a strong ability to capture from one side to the next in a continuous corridor.
right, and this is real interesting. If this is built out, even with the parks you have today, if it's built out, 39 parks are connected.
At 89.
Out of 89, alive within a third mile of those trails, so that really adds a connectivity to your community.
Are you all familiar with the new Bloomingdale trail in Chicago?
I'm not.
No. Well, everybody's talking about it. They took an old railroad and they turned it into a trail with access to other area parks. And I haven't seen it yet, but I lots of friends who've been on it and just think it's this wonderful thing. And I'm just,
I think that's also going to be very similar to the one they did in New York City, if I'm not mistaken.
They did one in New York.
I've been on that one.
Oh, the Highline.
The Highline.
Yes, I have heard that. I was talking to
Yeah, it's a
someone.
great feature.
I was talking to David Compton up from Trust for Public Lands, and she's working on that project.
It's going to be bigger
Yeah,
than the Highline.
yeah. Now, the people working on it are saying, no, we're not, it's not the High Line in Chicago. It's its own thing, which is even, of course, better, which is probably true. So, but yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a very high-profile project. It's getting a lot of press around the country, and it is a really cool facility. Trails. Speaking of trends, to me, trails are, they're a long-term trend, but they're one of the best things you can do in the community right now in terms of satisfying a big range of needs. Trails serve a lot of people because they're linear, so they affect more people. More people are closer, to them than a single park. There's just a lot of great things about trails that I think you can't go wrong building trails and connecting trails. If you have existing trails, connecting them together, this is something you can't go wrong with right now in terms of improving these numbers, improving these kind of maps, but also just making people happy.
It definitely shows up in surveys where wherever we go, it's a cost-effective element because it's relatively cheap to grade
As long
and
as you have the
stone and
land.
pave.
Yeah, as long as you have the land to access it.
And they are highly utilized. I mean, I can tell you the last couple weekends I've been on the DuPage River Trail because I live pretty close to it, and the bike riding and the walking, the jogging, and the ability to pull off and sort of interact with nature, even though it's not the most pristine environment, but being close to the water and seeing things that are nearby, it's just a huge diversity of ages and income types, and it's really well utilized. So that ability to connect up to the north, to me, would open up a lot of opportunities for the Park District to have some really nice connectivity to other communities as well.
You're on south end, next way, with River Road and Fraser dead ends, people going up and down that path and turning around because they can't go through. And, that thing was open, there'd be a lot of traffic going through all the time. But it's just the local people just going up and down and utilizing the path is immense.
Sure. I mean, I've now that my kids are old enough to ride bikes pretty consistently, I ride my bike more on the trails, and I can tell you that they're heavily utilized.
Especially along the river.
Exactly.
They want to see the water.
You've got, I mean, as Robbie mentioned, when we were talking last week, and you've got a really nice water feature that runs through your town, and the ability that your community to the north has developed that great access that you could ride from here all the way up to Wheaton, practically, connect into the Forest Preserve Trail, and then go on the Prairie Path. And I mean, you have connectivity that is really unbelievable if you wanted to do that. Most people wouldn't, but trails are a great investment.
Especially with the bridge, if they could possibly connect it, and people like, history and so forth, something old, something walk across, especially across the river. All kinds of different amenities in regards to even the walking more features,
Can you get email on that? That's on your computer, is it?
I don't know.
Oh,
No.
You wanna talk a little bit about the scoring?
I want to talk about that other, yeah, we have another table we put together, and unfortunately, it didn't make it in time for this presentation. But what we have done is take a lot of the numbers that we generated here and compared it to basically the data set that we have of similar communities around the country, and sorted by population. And we were just looking at it at dinner, and really, what it shows, it's kind of in summary, is that when we compare your numbers to the numbers we've generated for similar sized communities by population, you're right in line. It just, you know, you're right there in terms of in terms of the number of parks, the size of parks, the amount of things in those parks. The indicators are that you really line up well. There's no big deficiencies or anything like that these numbers would show. So I was going to email it to Todd so you could maybe get it up there on the screen.
Is it logged into you?
Yeah, I can send it to a different email address if you
No,
want.
you can go ahead, I'm just
Push down
gonna
towards
minimize
the
this.
window.
The signal's not strong, but we do have a signal. So we'll see if we can get to it.
There's all kinds of
Go for it, I'll let you log in whenever you need to.
Oh, I would, yeah, I would be able to. I don't remotely log in.
Can I see it to email?
I like that.
Sure, if you want to speak, I can't, I can get into my laptop.
But you know, when we're talking about where we have these old fashioned cars, it's one of the things that.
Are there any other questions that you might have? Yes.
I just had a question about the demographics that
Okay.
you drew. Did you take in account, I know you focused on the Hispanic population and the African American population specifically, but what about, I know that in one of those gray areas that are up in the top by 127th Street, there's a very diverse minority population, or I would say it's pretty actually large, of other ethnicities. So I was just wondering if you accounted for like other.
It's just a key US Census
Okay,
demographics.
because they probably, the census probably does have data on like the Indian population,
It really does.
Asian.
Asian, correct.
Okay, but not
African American,
non-Asian.
American Islander,
Yeah,
Latino heritage, which could be, like I said, more than one race. It's kind of tough.
okay.
I can look and see if Esri has any other.
Because there are a lot of Asians and Indian and that kind
Oh,
of.
absolutely. I mean, when I did Commissioner's Park, we were one of the first people to put a cricket pitch, and that place is packed with,
Because this is the issue that I was having.
Oh,
Right,
it's
so- yeah.
Okay.
So I can look into that. I know that wasn't something that we had specified, but I can see how much more they can break that down,
Okay.
because they're still working on that. So I can definitely see if we can get more of a racial breakdown in each area, so we just have a little more knowledge of what's going on.
Yeah, and specifically just because of the gray areas, is where I believe that population might be more prevalent, so I was just wondering if making a difference on.
I can definitely inquire.
Okay, no, it's just a question, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be too specific, but I've done a lot of coding myself with other stuff, so I was just interested in.
Well, what they do is they pull the 2010 census, and then we work with Esri, which is a great provider of statistics, and you know, they do the projections. And actually, we had 2019, now we have 2020 projections, which is nice. So, but I can look and see what other categories they might have in terms of definitely the projection possibility. Because I know I don't think the census breaks it down to that level, but maybe we can get some other information.
I want to just thank you. The information is excellent. We can certainly use it in our master planning and.
It's very different, and what Robbie showed you at the end is what most people get. You just get bubbles on a map. It doesn't really take into the context of your situation. And you have a pretty complex district,
Right.
and you have opportunities to change some of the future as you get into the new growth areas. You know, I'm sure if all that happened before the recession, you guys would be going down that same road.
Should be it.
But the thing is to Larry's point, I mean, if we're gonna go in and wanna discuss some new ways of doing business, we gotta have some data to show what we're talking about. And this will definitely give the district more of a leg up to have really structured conversations about, you know, this is what we did back when the village was being developed. As this property comes online, 30 years have trended in a different direction, and we want to make sure that we are providing the new experiences to our residents. So that's really good information to have beyond just sort of 1985 NRPA level standard. So, and it really will help in the CIP and some of those decisions because there are redundancies of service, so we have to make some good decisions on